Hello there, this is Agenda 2030. I am Toyin Kamyang John. On today's episode, we will be dwelling on refugee and migration issues, which is a cardinal point of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. First, let's run you through some latest developments in the country in the implementation of the SDGs in Nigeria. After this break, stay with us.
Nigeria will continue to support the United Nations in all its efforts, including the attainment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you.
Agenda 2030, showing on this channel. Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind. Agenda 2030. As a successor framework for the Millennium Development Goals, the global community rolled out a bigger, deeper, and more encompassing framework called the Sustainable Development Goals, designed to transform our world, lift the poor out of poverty, as well as ensure inclusive and healthy society. On Agenda 2030, we take you on a media trip to the global destination of the future we want. With everyone on board, we focus on the people and their struggle, the civil society and their agitations, the government and her development effort, the Global Development Agenda, its 17 goals and 169 targets. We bring you all the deliberations, insightful conversations, and high-level partnerships on the road to global destination. Agenda 2030, showing on this channel. Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind.
The world is grappling with the migration challenge, which was created by a sharp increase in international migration and changing migration policies. This has created a serious humanitarian challenge and opened new windows of opportunity for development, which countries are exploring. Nigeria has its own share of the migration challenge.
The moment you just leave this Nigeria boundary, that's where the problem starts.
I want to go back home. I'll please spend 3 months in
In 2017, Nigeria's international migrant stock was 1.23 million. It increased sharply from over 487,000 in 2000 to over 988,000 in 2010. Nigeria also has a large diaspora population, which runs in millions, and a high concentration of forced migrants within and outside the country. As at October 2018, there were 1,959,458 forcibly displaced persons in Nigeria, comprising 31,948 refugees and over 10,000 asylum seekers from different countries, and 1,926,748 internally displaced persons, largely from the northeast part of the country. There were also 231,473 Nigerian refugees in Niger, Chad, and Cameroon republics. International migration dynamics have resulted in a wave of changes in migration policies. Stricter policies in Europe have particularly created a humanitarian situation with high numbers of irregular migrants from Nigeria and other African countries trapped en route to Europe. Nigeria was among the top 3 countries with migrants arriving Europe through the dangerous Mediterranean and Black Sea routes in 2017, with over 20,000 trapped in Libya.
We were picked up by immigration officials and sent to a detention camp.
I spent 8 months in the detention camp.
There was no food, no water.
So they used to give us in prison, they used to put us inside, they would cook it like porridge, but it's not good.
Ensuring this segment of the vulnerable population with disrupted livelihoods and uncertain future is not left behind, the Nigerian government took bold steps to arrest the situation from deteriorating and to facilitate the restoration of their livelihoods. In particular, the worrying situation in Libya necessitated the repatriation of thousands of Nigerians living in horrifying conditions in the country.
The ECOWAS protocol includes free movement of persons, and goods and services. But for those going to Europe, we are not, as an administration, agreeing for Nigerians to defy the desert, Sahara Desert, and the Mediterranean because they feel that there are greener pastures there, whether they are prepared for it or not.
Government is working with international partners to reintegrate these returnees into their communities.
Migration is a human phenomenon which cannot be stopped. But if we choose to migrate, we advocate that it should be done in a safe, orderly, regular and dignified way, and not in a dangerous and tortuous manner.
Where are we coming from? Which countries? Sorry? Which countries? Nigeria.
I'm going back to my father's house.
In addition to addressing the humanitarian situation created by the migration challenge, the world is paying more attention to the positive aspect of migration. Stakeholders at international and national levels are taking measures to enhance the positive impact of migration on sustainable development outcomes. This informed the decision to mainstream migration in the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which was adopted globally in 2015 and ratified by Nigeria.
We've been having partnership with other development partners, especially the Swiss Development Corporation, the IOM, on how to sensitize the general public on the ills and dangers of this irregular migration.
The national discourse has shifted to ensuring migration is humane, safe, and benefits individuals, communities, and Nigeria as a whole. The convergence of efforts of local and global players is therefore required to ensure Nigerians on the move and those forcibly displaced within and outside the country realize their full development potential within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. The National Commission for Refugees, Migrants and Internally Displaced Persons is taking the lead in this direction through its migration coordination mandate. It is working with relevant stakeholders to strengthen coherence between migration and development policies and programs, such that by 2030, no person of concern is left and Nigeria achieves the Sustainable Development Goals.
In response to the challenge of illegal migration and refugees in the country, the National Commission for Refugees, Migrations and Internally Displaced Persons, in partnership with the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, recently held the 2018 National Migration Dialogue. The move was mainly designed to address the disturbing challenges of refugees and illegal migration and IDPs in the country. Here are some of the highlights. With the theme Realizing Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) for all, including migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons (IDPs), the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and Internally Displaced Persons and the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals sought to deploy the 2018 National Migration Dialogue to facilitate a collective action towards the realization of migration-related SDGs in Nigeria. Particularly, the initiative sought to enhance understanding of the migration development nexus, make recommendations for policy actions, generate momentum among stakeholders to collectively act towards the realization of migration-related SDGs, and to develop and facilitate the development of instruments to track implementation of migration-related SDGs. The Swiss ambassador to Nigeria and representative of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, a United Nations refugee agency dedicated to saving lives, protecting rights, and building a better future for refugees, the forcibly displaced and stateless people, echoed the imperatives for tackling the Hydra-headed challenge.
The choice of this year's NMD motto echoes the substantial efforts that Nigeria has made in localizing the SDGs since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. It also carefully reflects the important work accomplished in the last 2 years with regard to materializing the migration development nexus. I am referring, of course, to the Global Compact on Migration that was adopted a week ago in Marrakesh, and that Switzerland co-facilitated all along. My country is now letting the Swiss parliamentary debate continue through to its conclusion. This will allow Switzerland to bring fully into accordance both internal and external political aspects.
I'd like to think that we in the European Union are working on all these three fronts. We are ready to promote investment in Africa and Nigeria to address root causes. We are ready to expand the role of the European Investment Bank in Nigeria. We are ready to work on expanding youth training and employment programs. We are strengthening our cooperation with the diaspora. We've worked and helped, working very, very closely with IOM in bringing home nearly 11,000 people from Libya since April 2017. We are ready to strengthen our police collaboration, to work in terms of strengthening those agencies of law enforcement so that we can break up criminal gangs. We are boosting our cooperation programs on reintegration, working closely with the National Commission for Refugees and also other national organizations such as NAPTIP.
Migration is one of the defining features of the 21st century and contributes significantly to all aspects of economic and social development, as well as environmental sustainability. And like all globalized development initiatives, realization of the SDGs requires good understanding of national context, tailoring responses to address development challenges, and developing instruments to keep track of performance. Speakers at the National Dialogue gave their support for concerted efforts.
Today's event is an indication of the strong commitment of the Nigerian government to the promotion of the plight of Nigerians on the move and those forcibly displaced within and outside the country. The participation of Mr. President is indeed a mark of responsibility which demonstrates the responsiveness of the current administration to emerging national and global issues and trends. It goes further to boost the image of Nigeria among the community of nations. With all the critical stakeholders in the migration and development spheres present here, I'm confident we'll generate ideas for solving most of the challenges that international migration poses to us and identify steps to proactively take to realize full development potentials of migration. Migration has been at the center of national and human development from time immemorial. Following various trends of intra and inter-nations interactions and civilizations, especially in the recent globalized world, migration has brought about the most exchange of values, cultures, and resources that have made the world more and more a global village.
The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development recognizes migration as a core development consideration, and this is the first time migration is integrated explicitly into the development agenda. The agenda is relevant to all mobile populations, regardless of whether internal, whether cross-border, displaced or not. It is very relevant, and that is why the inclusion of migration into SDGs and the tag that no one should be left behind is very important. The goals and targets will be made for all nations and peoples and all segments of society, irrespective of where migrants are. Any of the goals of the SDGs that affect them should be met.
According to our High Commissioner, in response to mixed migration movement, UNHCR has adopted a regional approach with 4 main objectives to prevent refoulement. Refoulement, it's a French word which means not to push back. That is, we're trying to ensure that people with protection needs are not pushed back. Refoulement, to improve access to asylum and security, to give the people of concern the information that allows them to make important decisions for their life. Now, within African region, as the President said, West African region, we have the OAU protocol relating to free movement. So there's generally easy movement within the West African sub-region. But in other regions, there's kind of limitation once West Africans are leaving the region.
In collaboration with the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, that was SAP SDGs, in collaboration with other stakeholders, establish the baseline indicator that was instituted in Nigeria. The early commencement of this program was to avoid the challenges faced during the implementation of the MDG. The MDG does not have a baseline. So we do have some performance tracking publications, but it came late. So that's why we don't know whether we could not tell whether the MDG was a success or failure, because there was no baseline to track it. And to avoid that, we could be moving to solve that problem. And in collaboration with OSAP, we have the 2016 SDG baseline report.
The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development emphasized the resolve to leave no one behind and the need to reach first the vulnerable and those who are the furthest behind. Concerns over individuals on the move were therefore factored in the setting up of the SDGs and targets. In his presentation at the technical session that followed the high-level opening ceremony, Bala Yunusa, the Senior Technical Assistant to the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, restated that 11 out of the 17 goals contains targets that are explicitly related to migration.
Under SDG 3, we have one key target that is related to migration. Of course, we've discussed about the good, the bad, and the ugly migration. So if we look at the good migration, when people have built capacity, when people are qualified, they're able to move, regular migration, and then they're able to impact not only in their host community, but also back home through transfer earnings and remittances. So we have approximately 7 sustainable development goals and 11 targets that are indicators that are directly related to migration that experts can look at and exploit. And as a country, we will be working with the National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and Internally Displaced Persons and the National Bureau of Statistics to basically develop migration-related indicators for tracking and reporting.
Conscious of the fact that migration is one of the topical issues on the global and national development agendas and an important area where multiple root causes of poverty, inequality, and injustice are operatives in hindering social development, President Muhammadu Buhari, in his keynote address, reaffirmed the position of his administration to continue to cooperate with local and international stakeholders to ensure safe, orderly, and regular migration involving full respect for human rights and the humane treatment of migrants, regardless of migration status of refugees and other displaced persons.
This event brings together all those who are working in different migration-related areas, including government, international, and local agencies and organizations, civil society, academia, private sector, and unions. These people, drawn from 36 states of the Federation and the Federal Capital Territory, gather to discuss how best to manage migration dynamics in the country. We commend the leadership of National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and internally displaced persons in this regard. Migration governance in Nigeria has seen continuous improvement since the expansion of National Commission for Refugees, Migrants, and internally displaced persons mandate to include the coordination of all migration-related matters in the country as well as the resettlement of internally displaced persons in the nation. This is evidenced by various government interventions and programs aimed to provide IDPs, refugees, and migrants with best tools to become self-reliant. Concrete examples of our efforts include evacuation of hundreds of Nigerian migrants from Libya, which was overseen by a delegation of top government officials, the protection-based activities being offered to asylum seekers and refugees in Nigeria, as well as the planned safe and voluntary return of the thousands of Nigerians currently living as asylum seekers in Cameroon through a tripartite agreement between Nigeria, Cameroon, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. These are all well thought and out activated that will ensure Nigeria remains a migrant-friendly nation. The theme of this year's dialogue is realizing sustainable development goals for all, including migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons. Migration does not matter just because migrants add to development. Migration also matters because migrants are first and foremost human beings and are therefore entitled to their fundamental human rights. While we explore, strengthen, and promote migration and development issues, let us not forget the first responsibility we owe to common humanity, namely working for the well-being of persons of concern, promoting and protecting the rights of each citizen. Our approach to migration must therefore be total, as we follow our citizens living outside the country to ensure that they are respected and treated with dignity. We also have the same responsibility to the millions of non-citizens living and working within our own borders. I am encouraged to know that Nigeria has made efforts in the fight against irregular migration. Apart from approving a national migration policy, which is an overall framework for the governance of migration in the country, the federal government has fared well on the implementation of poverty alleviation programs through empowerment, such as N-Power, the federal government enterprise and empowerment program, such as the trader money and market money schemes, improvement of infrastructure in order to provide an enabling environment for entrepreneurs. Several million Nigerians have benefited from the N-Power scheme, among other national social investment programs of this administration. The federal government, through its relevant institutions, has also embarked on sensitization of citizens to the dangers of irregular migration. This is complementary to other institutional frameworks put in place to combat irregular migration, such as the acts establishing National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Human Persons and Nigerian Immigration Service, and sectorial policies like the National Labor Migration Policy. This is all part of efforts aimed at eradicating the drivers of irregular migration, such as poverty, unemployment, climate change, conflicts, and social inequalities. I am also pleased to say that a national policy on internal displacement is in the process of adoption, which will help regulate the internal displacement crisis and complement the fight against insurgency on which the federal government is fully committed. It is also worthy to mention the Global Compact on Migration, which was adopted by 164 countries of the United Nations on the 10th to 11th of December 2018, which Nigeria participated in and chaired one of the sessions in the plenary. Nigeria's commitment to Agenda 2030 and ensuring that sustainable development goals are realized for all, leaving no one behind.
Nigeria has adopted the SDGs and is making concerted efforts to meaningfully act towards realizing these goals. However, while the interrelationship between migration and SDGs has been recognized, the realization of these interlinkages has not been explored, and indicators for tracking migration-related targets are not fully captured in the National SDGs database. To ensure migration contributes to positive development outcomes and ultimately to realize the SDGs, there is need to understand the impact of migration on the achievement of SDGs and the impact this achievement will have on future migration patterns. And that's it for our package today. Do follow us on all our social media platforms. Join us again next week. I am Toyin Kamyang John saying bye.